What if I told you that this very moment, this precise second, was not an accident? What if I told you it was orchestrated, not by chance, but by the quiet pull of purpose? What if right now you're standing at a crossroads, one you've been approaching your entire life, and this message is the pivot point? You didn't stumble upon this by luck. You were meant to hear it, because something within you has grown weary of silence, weary of drifting, weary of delay. That unrest inside you, the quiet voice of your truer self, it reached out and drew this speech into your world, because it knows you're ready. You may not feel ready. You may still wrestle with doubt, but readiness doesn't depend on emotion. It depends on decision. And today you decide. This isn't just a speech. This is a spiritual disruption, a divine encounter between who you've been and who you are becoming. And if you stay with me, not partially, not distracted, but fully, it will shift the rhythm of your life. But hear this. This change won't come from what I say once. It will come from what you rehearse over and over. Because repetition is what molds the mind. The subconscious, the soil of all results, doesn't respond to hype. It responds to suggestion, to words repeated with conviction until they take root and overwrite every lie you once accepted as truth. So don't just hear this. Study it, revisit it, live it. Let these words become the new script of your inner world. The greats I studied, Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Charles Schwab, Abraham Lincoln, had one trait in common. They mastered their internal language. They repeated belief until fear had nowhere left to grow. Ford once said, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right." Why? Because belief repeated becomes belief installed, and belief installed becomes destiny. If you want to become the man you were made to be, then this is not a message to hear once. This is the voice you return to on your darkest days, the beat you rise to each morning, the compass you follow when the noise stops, and most of all, it's the fire you rekindle until it becomes your own. This isn't entertainment. This is reprogramming. And if you stay with me from start to finish, the man who ends this speech won't be the same man who began. Because today we are not just talking about change, we are becoming it. Let's begin. There's a voice inside you that never quite fades. It doesn't shout, it doesn't plead, but it whispers, steady, constant. It whispers that you were made for more. Even when you bury it beneath excuses, beneath noise, beneath routine, it doesn't die. It waits. It whispers. And today that whisper is growing louder, not just because you're tired of fear, not just because you're done with delay, but because the voice inside you is done being ignored. I've spent decades studying the lives of history's most successful men, men who were not born with brilliance, but who built it. Henry Ford, born on a farm, surrounded by doubt, without elite education, still dared to build an empire. Why? Because he trusted that inner voice. He once said, "I am looking for a lot of men who have an infinite capacity to not know what can't be done." And it begins with this, trusting the whisper more than the world. The world will always hand you reasons to settle, reasons to wait, reasons to fear. It will dress up logic as caution and fear as wisdom. But the voice inside you, it isn't concerned with what the world says. It's only concerned with who you were born to become. And until you move, until you choose, that voice will remain unsettled. And I believe you feel it now. It's why you're still listening. Deep down, you're done being half awake, done replaying yesterday. You've tried comfort. You've tried distractions. You've tried waiting. And still the whisper remains. A whisper that says, "I'm not done yet. I am not this version of myself. There's more in me, and I refuse to die with this music still inside." Do you realize how rare that is? How many men silence that voice forever? They drown it in approval, in delay, in comfort. They learn to cope with mediocrity. But not you, not now, because this moment and this message is a reckoning, a face-off between who you've been and who is rising. And the man who is rising isn't interested in shallow goals. He doesn't chase applause. He doesn't crave comfort. He craves transformation. That's why you must repeat this message, because the voice that brought you here, it needs reinforcement, daily, hourly, constantly. If you don't feed it, the world will silence it. But if you do, if you speak to it with fire and repetition, it will take over. And once it does, the world no longer decides who you are. Andrew Carnegie once told me, "A man's thought, spoken with belief and repeated with discipline, becomes the law of his life." That's not poetry, that's law. So let it become your law. Rehearse this voice. Let it guide your mornings, anchor your nights. Let belief bury the old self. Because this is the real war, not against others, but against the version of you that still believes the lie, "I'm not ready." You are ready, not because you feel it, but because you decided. And all power begins at the point of decision. You were meant to find this. Now you must become the reason. Let's go deeper. Every man faces a moment that divides his life into two parts, before the decision and after. Not a casual decision, not a convenient one, but one made so completely, so fully, that everything before it fades and everything after it sharpens like steel. That moment is now. The moment where the man you've been must bow to the man you've chosen to become. The world may call it change, but the greats, those I've studied, called it identity. And identity begins where hesitation ends. Charles M. Schwab, the man Carnegie trusted to lead his empire, wasn't always the smartest man in the room. He didn't have the most credentials. He didn't waste time debating the weather before planting the seed. He moved. He acted, he decided, and because he moved when others stalled, committed when others wavered, he became indispensable. Why? Because he understood what few do. Decisiveness is more than a habit. It's a command to the subconscious. It's how you tell your mind, this is who I am now. And once that command is issued, the mind goes to work, making it real. But delay that decision, and fear multiplies, doubt creeps in like smoke. You start asking smaller questions, shrinking your vision, looking for permission, rather than walking in power. Before long, you're not living. You're rehearsing how to stay the same. So I ask, what decision have you delayed? Is it the decision to speak boldly, to lead with presence, to walk away from what limits you, to stop apologizing for the fire inside? Because every day you delay, that fire dims, and your mind learns to tolerate a life you were never meant to accept. Let me be clear, you cannot wait for certainty and still build greatness. Certainty comes after the decision, not before. That's why Henry Ford, when told his vision of a single-block V8 engine was impossible, told his engineers, build it anyway. When they failed, he said again, build it anyway, not out of stubbornness, but because he had already decided. And that decision, anchored in belief, pulled the impossible into existence. That's how power works. It doesn't tiptoe, it doesn't wait for approval, it decides, and the universe responds. You want transformation, then choose it, not with emotion, with finality. Say it aloud, not as a hope, but as a command. I have already decided. I do not drift. I do not delay. I do not explain, because the man who hesitates teaches his mind that his word holds no weight. But the man who moves without stalling, without broadcasting, trains his mind to obey. And when your mind obeys you, fear loses its voice. Remember, Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb because he was patient. He did it because he was relentless. Every failed attempt wasn't a reason to pause. It was a sign to persist. He had already written the end of the story. He was just walking his way there, and that's what I want for you. No more pacing, no more wondering, no more waiting for change to find you. Be the change. This moment is the line in the sand. On one side, all the fear, all the delay, all the doubt. On the other, the man who does not flinch, fold, or wait. Let that man rise. Let him act. Not tomorrow, not when he feels ready. Now, you don't need a plan, you need a pattern, and the pattern is movement, because every time you act, you tell your subconscious, this is who I am, and that becomes identity, and identity becomes destiny. So from this moment on, decide swiftly, act fully, commit completely, no more drifting, no more maybe. The voice inside you has waited long enough. It's time you declare, this is the man I am now, and I will not look back. Let's keep going. Discipline is the silent architect of empires. Drift is the silent assassin. Every man must choose which one he will serve, because both demand allegiance, but only one leads to freedom. Drift doesn't shout. It creeps. It soothes. It delays. It asks for nothing at first, but takes everything in the end. Drift will let you feel clever for waiting. It will disguise hesitation as wisdom. It will whisper, think one more time. And while you're thinking, your moment disappears. But discipline is the tongue of the builder. It doesn't care about feelings. It doesn't wait for motivation. It shows up when you do. It honors its word. It silences noise. It executes. Not because it wants to, but because it said it would. And in that relentless consistency, a man is remade. He stops being fragments of fear and becomes something else entirely, unshakable. Let me show you the life of Andrew Carnegie, a man I studied deeply. He wasn't born to wealth. He didn't inherit success. He started as a boy running errands in a telegraph office, learning Morse code from the clicks and clatter. And yet, by the height of his career, he controlled more wealth than royalty. Was it luck? Privilege? No, it was discipline. He studied relentlessly. He mastered the habit of observation. While others wasted breath on gossip, he trained his mind to focus. While many celebrated mediocrity, he read. He studied power. He captured his thoughts in writing. He planned. He spoke less and acted more. So when opportunity appeared, he didn't pause to ask if he was ready. His discipline had already answered that question. He moved and he won. This is not theory, this is law. Charles Schwab lived by that same law. He began humbly and rose to become president of U.S. Steel. Schwab wasn't the most technical man in the company. He wasn't the sharpest mathematician, nor the most gifted engineer, but he was the most consistent, the most driven, the most disciplined. He arrived early. He demanded excellence, not just from those around him, but first from himself. He led by presence, by certainty, by unwavering commitment, and people followed him not because of charisma alone, but because discipline had carved him into a man of gravity, a man of decision, a man who said what he would do and then did it. Can you say the same? Are you the man who honors his own word when no one is watching? Or are you still waiting for motivation, for emotion, for applause? Here's the truth most men avoid. If you only act when it's easy, you're not in control. You're at the mercy of your feelings. You're a servant to circumstance. You're drifting. But the disciplined man, he acts anyway. He rises early, not because he loves it, but because his mission demands it. He speaks his vision aloud, not for approval, but to install belief. He practices repetition, not because he's weak, but because he understands that strength is built in the doing. Do you think Thomas Edison worked only when inspired? He didn't build laboratories of comfort. He built rituals. He didn't depend on creative bursts. He built systems. He trained assistants. He filled notebook after notebook with trials, failures, experiments, and worked with the precision of a man consumed by purpose. 10,000 failures didn't stop him. Why? Because discipline had become his foundation, and fear cannot survive in a disciplined mind. Fear thrives in chaos, in inconsistency, in minds that treat purpose like a hobby. But discipline starves fear. It leaves it no space to grow. This is what you must understand. If your days aren't shaped by intention, they're shaped by drift. If you don't govern your hours, your fears will. You must decide now what your days will contain, what you will speak, what you will do, what you will no longer tolerate, because until your daily behavior reflects your deepest beliefs, your results will continue reflecting your old identity. Let me ask you, as I've asked young men I've mentored before, if someone followed you for 24 hours and they couldn't hear your words, only observe your actions, would they know what your purpose is? Could they guess what you're building? Would your discipline speak louder than your silence? If not, it's time to rebuild. And you don't rebuild in theory, you rebuild in ritual. Every morning you rise before the world starts shouting. You declare your aim aloud. You rehearse your vision with intensity. You plan your movement with precision. And you act without delay, without debate, without permission from mood or circumstance. This is not punishment. This is not grind. This is freedom. Discipline is the only true freedom a man will ever know, because it's the only thing that keeps his mind and body from being ruled by fear. Abraham Lincoln, in the darkest nights of the Civil War, didn't let chaos dictate his course. He moved with solemnity, with focus, with discipline. He read, he wrote, he walked in silence. He carried a nation, not with noise, but with steadiness. That is discipline at its highest form. Now it's your turn, not to mimic these men, but to live the principle, to walk with discipline into a version of yourself that fear cannot touch, to stop waiting for the storm to pass and start training in the rain, to stop chasing motivation and become the man who doesn't need it. This is not for the crowd. This is for you. Say it aloud. I am not ruled by feelings. I am ruled by decisions. I do not drift. I decide. My rituals build my power. My discipline is my identity. And don't say it once. Don't say it twice. Say it every day. Let this part of the speech become the mirror you return to when excuses try to creep in, when ease tries to seduce you, when the hard thing feels optional. Because the man who repeats this, the man who lets discipline carve his life, becomes impossible to shake, impossible to stop, impossible to fear. Let's continue. Everything you are right now, your confidence, your doubt, your fears, your drive was shaped by one force: repetition. Not luck, not fate, not genetics. Repetition. You've repeated certain thoughts so often they became second nature. You've spoken certain words so many times they became your inner voice. You've taken certain actions so regularly they became your identity. So if those thoughts were rooted in doubt, if those words were soaked in fear, if those actions came from hesitation, what do you think you've become? Let me say it plainly. You are not your circumstances. You are your patterns. And what you repeat, you reinforce. This is not poetry. It's not philosophy. It's law. Your subconscious mind, the source of your instincts, your reactions, your habits, does not question. It does not analyze. It does not care if something is true or false. It obeys what it hears most often and with the greatest emotional force. That's why casual language is no longer acceptable. That's why you can no longer joke about your goals. That's why you must stop entertaining doubt. You must speak power, act in power, repeat power until it becomes who you are. Let's return to Henry Ford. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. What was he doing? Autosuggestion, programming, training his subconscious, not through theory, but through belief, repeated as law. Ford didn't say it once. He lived it. He breathed it. He built his world around it. His factories ran on rhythm. His vision for the Model T wasn't fueled by hope. It was powered by relentless repetition. Repetition in engineering, in leadership, in execution, until the impossible became the norm. Edison was no different. He didn't create the light bulb because he was a genius. He created it because he failed 10,000 times and didn't flinch. Why? Because he had already made up his mind. This will work. And when belief is repeated so often that it fuses with your nervous system, you stop moving like a man full of doubt. You start walking like a man who knows, because repetition creates rhythm. Rhythm builds identity, and identity delivers results. So let me ask you, what do you say to yourself when you're tired, when you're frustrated, when no one's watching? That not your goals is your programming. You could have the greatest aim in the world, but if you're repeating weakness, your subconscious will destroy the mission before it begins. But if, starting today, you begin to repeat strength, everything changes. You speak power, even when you feel small. You move decisively, even when unsure. You hold your posture, even when alone, not because it feels natural, but because you're installing a new nature. This is the part most men miss. They get inspired, they feel the fire, then they go back to their old voice, old posture, old identity, and wonder why nothing changes. Let me make this clear.
Change is not emotional. It is not motivational. It is repetition. You become what you say the most. You become what you rehearse the most. You become what you tolerate the most. So if you truly want to rise, if you truly want to leave fear behind, if you truly want to become unrecognizable, then you must become relentless about what you repeat. Every morning, I am focused. I am powerful. I act without hesitation. I do not drift. I do not shrink. I do not ask permission. I lead my mind. I lead my time. I lead my destiny. And every night you repeat it again, not because it's magic, but because it's how you rewrite your operating system. Repetition is how the greatest men I studied built their strength. Andrew Carnegie repeated his chief aim daily and demanded that those around him do the same. He knew the mind could be shaped. He knew belief could be trained. And he never let a single day pass without feeding that belief. This wasn't superstition. It was strategy. Just like muscle is built through repeated motion, mental strength is built through repeated thought. And every word you speak is a rep. So be intentional. Be ruthless. Stop telling stories that weaken you. Stop using words that keep fear alive. Stop letting casual thoughts design your destiny. Say it now. I repeat what I want to become. My thoughts are not suggestions. They are commands. I do not rehearse fear. I install faith. This is the real work. Not once. Not when convenient. Not when the world gives you space. Every single day. This message is not just a speech. It is a mirror. And it will only transform you if you return to it. Repeat it. Etch it into your rhythm. The greatest breakthroughs I've ever witnessed, mine or others, never came from hearing truth once. They came from repeating it until it became the only voice left. That is why this must become your habit. Wake, repeat, fall, repeat, doubt, repeat, win, repeat, because repetition doesn't just build belief, it seals it. And once belief is sealed, fear has nowhere left to land. So go back to the beginning of this message, not later, now. Play it again. Speak it aloud. Let its words shape your stance, your breath, your silence. You are not weak. You've just been rehearsing weakness. But from this moment on, you repeat only strength. Now let's continue and install the next layer of mastery. There comes a moment in every man's life when the waiting must end, not because the fear has vanished, not because the path is finally clear, but because the man decides. He decides that enough is enough, that drifting is death, that delay is defeat, that life in its highest form belongs only to those who move. You see, fear doesn't need to overpower you. It just needs you to pause. Every plan you postpone, every dream you shelve, every moment you delay, that's fuel for fear, because fear feeds on stillness. But the second you move, even slightly, the balance shifts. The moment you act, Not with words, but with will, fear begins to lose its grip. Let me take you to a moment you may not know. Charles M. Schwab had already risen under Carnegie. He'd already proven himself. But when Carnegie set out to merge multiple steel companies into what would become U.S. Steel, a deal worth over $400 million, unimaginable at the time, Schwab didn't flinch. He stood before the titans of industry and delivered a speech with such clarity, such resolve, such certainty. It brought the room to silence. Not because he had every answer, but because he had made a decision. He had chosen his tone. He had claimed his posture. He embodied conviction. Carnegie would later say that Schwab's speech was the most effective he had ever witnessed. Not because of technique, but because of tone, because of movement, because Schwab didn't wait for perfect words. He acted. This is what you must learn. Delay is deception. Waiting for motivation is like waiting for fire to ignite itself. It never does. The spark begins with you, and you light it through motion. So let me speak directly to that project you've been delaying, that vision you've parked on the side, that promise you made to yourself once everything settles. That's the thing you must begin, not later, now, because once you move, something shifts. The fear-clouded mind begins to clear. The drained energy returns. The strength you thought was gone starts to rise in you, because clarity does not come before action. Clarity comes from action. Thomas Edison knew this. You think he waited for certainty before inventing the light bulb? No. He tried. He failed. He moved. Again and again, 10,000 times. He didn't wait for a guarantee. He acted until it worked. And that, my friend, is the secret. The men you admire, the ones who changed history, who built legacies, they were not fearless. They were simply done waiting. Abraham Lincoln could have waited. He could have delayed the Emancipation Proclamation until the war turned fully in the Union's favor, until the politics aligned, until the critics fell silent. But he didn't. He wrote it. He declared it. He moved. Why? Because he knew the mission was greater than his comfort. He knew history would never remember the man who hesitated, only the one who decided. Now I turn the mirror to you. How much longer will you wait for the right day, for the perfect mood, for someone to give you permission? Let me offer you something better. Authority, not granted by another, not handed down by an institution, but chosen, declared, rehearsed, owned. You give it to yourself. Say it aloud. I no longer wait for ideal conditions. I create them. I do not wait for fear to leave. I move anyway. My life is built on decision, not delay. Breathe that in. Let it settle into your body. Let it take root, because the man who moves without waiting becomes untouchable. While others hesitate, he builds. While others flinch, he walks forward. While others drown in regret, he becomes the kind of man who will never feel it. There is no power in potential, only in progress. Your ideas are not your future. Your execution is, and execution begins the moment you stop asking, "Am I ready?" and start declaring, "It's time." Let me say that again, because repetition is power. You do not become ready by thinking. You become ready by moving. You do not become fearless by waiting. You become fearless by acting while afraid, until fear cannot keep up. This moment is your turning point, not because you feel something new, but because you do something new. And when you look back years from now, you won't remember the inspiration. You'll remember the decision, the moment you chose movement over safety, the moment you declared, "I do not wait. I act. Say it now. I move first. I move fast. I do not flinch." Then prove it. Today, not tomorrow, because the man who acts in the face of fear becomes the man fear can no longer touch. Now let us continue into the next great principle, the one that turns action into destiny, purpose. Purpose is what happens when every move a man makes is aligned with something greater than himself. There is a force more powerful than fear, stronger than failure, mightier than pain. It is the force that holds a man upright when storms rage, when the world doubts him, when the road gets long and the soul grows tired. That force is purpose. Fear survives where there is no mission. When a man lacks a central aim, he's easily distracted, easily shaken. But when purpose burns in the soul, fear has no room to breathe. Purpose consumes fear. Let me make this clear. You do not conquer fear by willpower alone. You conquer fear by falling so deeply in love with your mission that fear becomes irrelevant. Every great man I studied understood this. Andrew Carnegie didn't rise from poverty by chasing wealth. No, he had a mission to bring steel to every corner of the nation, to industrialize a country, to leave a legacy greater than his own name. He once told me, "Mr. Hill, a man without a mission is already defeated." That single line changed my life. From that day I understood. Purpose is not a slogan. It is not a poster on the wall. It is the engine of the mind, the fuel of faith, the death of fear. Carnegie's purpose was so unshakable that market crashes, political opposition, and public doubt became irrelevant. He wasn't reacting. He was building. And you must do the same. The average man changes direction weekly. One day he craves greatness. The next, comfort. 1 month he's on fire. The next, distracted. Then he wonders why fear keeps catching up to him. But purpose anchors a man in fire. Thomas Edison had one mission: to harness electricity and bring light to the world. He wasn't dabbling. He wasn't testing the waters. He decided, and that decision carried him through 10,000 failures. Let me ask you plainly,
what are you willing to fail at 10,000 times? Because unless your mission is that deep, fear will win. Edison's purpose made him immune to doubt. Every failed attempt was not a reason to stop. It was just another step forward. That is the mindset of a man possessed by purpose. Now look at Lincoln. He didn't lead during peace. He didn't govern in calm. He led a nation through war, division, and despair. And still he didn't waver. Why? Because his aim was sacred: to preserve the Union, to end the moral atrocity of slavery. He could have waited. He could have compromised. He could have sought the easier road. But he didn't, because purpose made fear too small to stop him. Now it's your turn. And I don't mean a vague ambition. I mean one sentence, one mission, one aim, so clear, so permanent, so you, that it becomes the lens through which you see everything. Write it, speak it, repeat it, and let your entire life bend to it. When you rise, your first thought should not be, what should I do today? It should be, what moves me closer to the mission? You are not here to dabble. You are not here to float. You are not here to survive. You are here to build. Say it now. My life is governed by purpose. My energy is directed. My actions are aligned. Say it again. I do not drift. I do not delay. I live with mission. This is how you make your mind fear-proof. You don't just resist fear. You replace it. You give your mind something stronger to follow. A distracted mind will always find fear, but a focused mind becomes unstoppable. Let me return to Schwab. He wasn't the smartest man in steel, but he carried purpose like armor. That's why Carnegie chose him, not for his skill, but for his clarity. When Schwab spoke, he didn't bark commands. He transferred belief. He spoke from purpose and into purpose. That's what made him a leader. That's what made him immune to fear. Now I turn to you. What will your life revolve around? What will you build? Who will you become? Not someday, now, because the clock is moving, the world is spinning, and every minute spent drifting is a minute you'll never recover. Say it with me. I live from purpose. I build from conviction. I am immune to fear, because I know why I exist. You don't need to see every step. You just need to choose your direction. The road will rise to meet the man who walks with mission, so walk. And when the storm comes, let it come. You've got fire in your chest, clarity in your mind, and a mission etched into your soul. You don't need the storm to stop. You only need to keep moving, because purpose makes resistance feel like confirmation. You are not a man trying to find himself. You are a man declaring who he is and watching the world adjust. Now we arrive at the edge of who you were and who you are about to become. The man who began this message may have been tired, hesitant, heavy with delay, but the man who finishes is no longer the same. You've seen too much. You've heard the truth of your own power. You've remembered what most forget. Greatness is not given. It is claimed, and it is claimed daily. There is nothing more dangerous to fear than a man who remembers who he is, a man who speaks with conviction, a man who repeats power until it becomes his nature. That's what you've done here. But understand this, it does not end when the speech ends. This is not a one-time experience. Change doesn't come from a spark. It comes from repetition, from the daily hammer of belief, from returning to this message again and again until it becomes your inner voice. That is the secret to auto-suggestion. That is the discipline. Carnegie repeated his mission each morning. Ford fed his mind certainty constantly. Edison rehearsed belief so deeply, failure couldn't enter. And now it is your turn. You return to this speech when you rise. You return before you rest. You speak these truths until your subconscious accepts them as law, because the mind doesn't obey what it hears once. It obeys what it hears repeated with emotion. And every time you repeat this, you carve a new identity. Every time you declare these truths, you reinforce a new rhythm. Every time you return, you rise closer to your highest self. You were never meant to crawl. You were never meant to drift. You were never meant to shrink under pressure or apologize for your fire. You were meant to build, to command, to rise. You were meant to become the man others one day study and say he was unshakable, and that man is not in the future. He is here, in every decision you make, in every repetition you choose, in every return to this message. So I leave you with this. You are ready, not because you feel ready, but because you have decided. And what is decided in faith will become real in time. Say it aloud. I will return to this message daily until it becomes my inner voice. I will repeat these truths until they rewrite my identity. I will not live in fear. I will walk in fire. and then do it again, tomorrow, the next day, and the next, because the man who returns to power becomes power. Now go, speak less, move more, repeat, until fear no longer recognizes you, until discipline is effortless, until belief becomes your very breath,